Simcha, celebration, Simcha, Simcha, celebration of life.
Welcome to Simcha, a celebration of life. I'm your host, Eitan Berger. With degrees from Oxford and Columbia University, American-born writer and scholar William Kolbrenner is currently a professor of English literature at Bar-Ilan University. In his latest book, Minded Torah, of irony, fundamentalism, and love, Professor Kolbrenner unabashedly advocates renewed Jewish commitment and openness for the 21st century.
I began to write my book, Minded Torah, about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was preceded by a trip back to New York and to my aunt's house. She lives in a giant mansion in Long Island, and I began exploring in her attic. And I found in a box among an old talit and an old set of tefillin, I found a picture of my great-grandfather. And I became aware at the time that he was a Ger Chassid, and he lived in a town called Govorova. Now, one of the things that I found out about my grandfather was from a memory book or memorial book that was published in 1967 in Tel Aviv. This became a genre of books that were published in Israel during that time, and all these books memorialized communities that had been completely destroyed. And I found in the back of this book another picture of my grandfather with his family. My grandfather had taken 5 of his brothers out, but this book documented the remainder of the family, 5 of his other brothers and his sister and his parents who had all died. Now, my great-grandfather was named Velville, and I felt an immediate connection. I was named after him. The extraordinary thing about my great-grandfather was he was known in this community of Hasidim and Zionists and Bundists and Socialists as being the most pious member of the community. There's an article about him and his family. But what was also extraordinary to me was that he was not only known as the most pious, but as one of the most tolerant and forbearing. And I thought, this is just such an important model, I thought, not only for me and my family, but really for contemporary Israel, that so often we think about commitment to religious ideals and, let's say, tolerance as opposites, and we don't associate them with the same extremes or the same kinds of people. And for my great-grandfather, he really brought both of those two things together. And Minded Torah was my own attempt, really, to find a voice, a contemporary voice, which was at once committed, religious, but also, in some senses, skeptical, worldly, but above all, tolerant. So going back to my aunt's house and finding that book was for me a kind of personal revelation, a connection to the past, a past which I didn't really know existed, because one often thinks of that past as only religious or only ghettoed. But my great-grandfather, he was certainly in a small shtetl, but he also had the worldliness and the tolerance of contemporaries, and could be a model for contemporaries. Life works in funny ways. In 1998, I applied for an Israel Science Foundation grant on multiplicity and pluralism in literature and Jewish law. I didn't know at the time when I was writing a thesis, which later turned into, or will turn into, a book about Jewish pluralism, that I would give birth, or my wife would give birth, to our son with Down syndrome. And in a sense, all of my theoretical interest in pluralism, and maybe as we'll talk a little bit later, our tradition is built upon many voices. The Talmud is a collection of many voices. It's a collection of disputes, not arguments, not egotistical, polemical arguments, but disputes, as we would say in Hebrew, l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. So I developed since really 1993, when my wife and I came and moved to Israel, we discovered this Talmudic world of conversation, of dispute, of learning. Inevitably, when you have a child who's so different, who's screaming difference, one has to learn to accept or accommodate difference in ways that one doesn't expect. So we were taking things that we knew from our Torah learning, from our immersion in Jewish texts and the Jewish tradition. I think in Leviticus, the Torah says you should love your neighbor. It also says you should love the stranger. And our sages say, you might not like the stranger because you'll see a defect in him, a mum in Hebrew. And Rashi, the medieval commentator, says this: the mum that you see in him, the defect that you see in him, it's because you know you have it in yourself. And the Torah goes on and says, you were strangers in Egypt. I mean, we all have that sense. Jewish people are defined by our difference. And for us, learning to accept Shmuel, and that really wasn't so much of an issue, but really getting others to accept Shmuel. And in a certain sense, Shmuel has been a blessing for our family, obviously, in learning how to accept and accommodate difference. For the children in the building in which we live, they also have experience with difference. And I mean, I started out by saying that, you know, Shmuel is a child who's screaming difference, but of course all of our children are different. And for us especially, learning to accept Shmuel for who he was made us better parents in relationship to our other children.
Simcha, the celebration of life. Simcha, the celebration of life.
Professor William Kolbrenner has a passion for religious and particularly Jewish pluralism. His book, Minded Torah, of irony, fundamentalism, and love, tries to reconcile the ideas of living a committed religious life and remaining open to modern-day worldly ideals. As an educator, he tries in his work and teaching to open up the Torah to Jews who have not been exposed to it. Drawing from his own experience, Kolbrenner hopes to show others how one can balance religious observance with living in the modern world.
One of the tragedies in Israel today is the extent to which Jewish texts have become inaccessible to certain populations. And when I do get the chance to speak to my students privately, sometimes at lecture about Hanukkah or a Purim, about Jewish texts, there is that enormous sense of surprise that there's this tradition that they really knew very little about. I mean, that was my experience when I came to Israel, or when my wife and I first went to a beginner service in New York on the Upper West Side in the late 80s, is just surprised by books we didn't know, traditions we didn't know. I think the Jewish world would benefit from conversation, I mean, this is my own personal and very American sense, kind of emptying out the public sphere of making it a safe place for people to talk. This is, I think, the real challenge of Jewish life. My real challenge is to be both connected to Jewish life, to Jewish ritual, to Jewish practice, and to be open. I think that's extraordinarily difficult. We want, at the same time, like Yochanan ben Zakkai, to be parts of many conversations. But we also, and this is important for parenting, want to tell our children which are the most important or more important conversations. Meaning, I want my kids to be exposed, to be part of many worlds, so they can realize themselves or their many selves in relationship to those many worlds. But the challenge of being connected is still there. There's a Mishnah that says, the sages say, that their voice from Mount Sinai still rings. One can still hear it. And it's not so easy when one is, this is really the other side, when one is attuned to so many different kinds of conversations, to hear that voice from Sinai. Meaning that's a privileged voice. Meaning for all of our exposure and experience and immersion in different kinds of conversations, we want to hear that voice, because that voice really has a special way for Jews, for the Jewish people, of being transformative. Meaning at the same time that Judaism is obviously a universal religion, open religion, there is still the experience of Passover. You yourself should act as if you were going out of Egypt. You should present yourself as if you were going out of Egypt. See yourself as you're going out of Egypt. So there is that particularism, that sense of the divine agency in relationship to the person. I also think of another midrash, another story. I think a midrash is best explained as a kind of interpretive story about what happened on Mount Sinai at the time of Revelation. I heard this actually very early on when I was becoming a religious, and it seemed kind of unpleasant to me at the time. Medrash explains that when at each word or letter that was heard on Mount Sinai, every one of the Jews who was there died. And then they were resuscitated by the ministering angels. So as I said at the time, it seemed disturbing to me. But over the years, I've come to understand that the Midrash is saying that the Torah or revelation or the experience of the divine has a transformative possibility. That at every moment when one engages and one feels this connection, one changes. There's a concept among I think, neuropsychologists of neuroplasticity, that the brain is always changing. That from one second to another, the brain does not look the same. You could say the same thing of a person's soul, of the neshama, that's also changing. This neshama plasticity, the plasticity of the soul. And when one puts oneself in a relationship to divine revelation, there's the opportunity to change. So, I think that's the challenge. I think we're always we're struggling with the challenge of being both inside and outside. Meaning we're always, as modern people, we're always outside, we're always engaged. We're reading books, we're going to movies, we're talking to different kinds of people. The challenge then is for us to remain inside, to feel that connection, to hear the voice from Har Sinai. I think it's a challenge perhaps that's always been experienced by Jewish people, I'm not sure. Certainly, probably since early modernity, the 16th and 17th century, but I think especially acutely for us now. And it's hard to do both. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about skepticism and commitment. We can be both. It's a challenge. Most people, or maybe better said, most groups prefer either the one or the other. I think most people, if you give them the opportunity, would like to try to explore both. But it's a challenge.
Simcha, the celebration of life.
With the Shabbos project less than 2 weeks away, Jews from all over the world are preparing themselves to keep Shabbat from sunset Friday the 24th of October to nightfall on Saturday the 25th of October. So, will you be participating this year?
My thought on the Shabbos project is that it could change the lives of thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of Jews who never experienced Shabbos before. Imagine what we could give them. Imagine the taste they could have from experiencing a beautiful Shabbos that I'm sure they've never experienced in their own homes.
We're doing the Shabbos project from 2014. We're gonna do it! Yeah!
La sola idea de este proyecto que puede juntar a todos los judíos del mundo en una ocasión tan importante como es el día de Shabbat nos debe llenar de emoción, de satisfacción y de mucha alegría. Los invito a que participen y los invito a que nos apoyen. Muchas gracias.
6 days a week, we are what we do. And we do beautiful things. We continue God's creation. God created, gave us all the raw material, and we built ourselves a beautiful world. Except that during the week, despite our noble intentions, we lack humanity with all of our technology and all of our gimmicks and all of our gadgets and so on. We forget the other essence. And so on Shabbat, we are not what we do, but we are who we truly are. And so we return to be mothers, fathers, husbands, wives, brothers, sisters, human beings interacting with each other, enjoying the fruits of our labors, which sometimes go unnoticed. We put the human touch into humanity. Shabbat.
This is an unbelievable initiative that started in South Africa 12 months ago. It amazed me how many people had heard about it just through the Jewish network worldwide. And now that it's going global, we're very proud and committed to making it a tremendous success in Melbourne.
Cuando vi el proyecto de Shabbat que hicieron en Sudáfrica, me pareció que era un espectáculo. Y dije, había que hacerlo en Panamá. Luego, cuando me enteré que en la fecha 24 y 25 de octubre decidieron hacer algo similar a nivel internacional, yo estaba muy contento y dije que vamos a acompañar este proyecto y ser parte de esta experiencia inolvidable, porque Shabbat es una experiencia muy especial y junto a todas las comunidades creo que va a ser algo fuera de serie.
Hey, I'm Eliezer from King David.
And I'm Ben from Mount Scopus.
We went on March Thing together and now we're going to do the Shabbos project.
And we're going to do it.
Woohoo!
Yeah!
When I first heard about the project from Barbie Goldfoot some months ago, I was quite skeptical and I thought, can this happen in Hong Kong? And then I started speaking to people around the community, and we have a very diverse community in Hong Kong, numbering about 5,000, ranging all the way across the spectrum of orthodoxy. But I spoke to people, and everyone I spoke to was very positive and said, yeah, we can make it happen. And this is what we're going to do. We had many volunteers, both for the planning and for practically taking part. Plans are already underway for a holiday and also for a Havdalah concert. We know we will make it a success. It will work. Everybody is very excited and keen. We want to join the rest of the world in the Shabbos project around the world. We can keep it together.
Simcha, celebration of life. Simcha, celebration of life.
British-born singer and songwriter Alex Clare grew up in a secular home. During the mid-2000s, his exploration of Judaism began. Now, as a practicing Orthodox Jew, Alex does not perform, travel, or work on Shabbat, the Jewish Sabbath, or religious holidays.
You know I'm not one to break promises. I don't want to hurt you, but I need to breathe.
I'm a professional musician, and as such have always played music. There was a stage in my life, however, about 7 years ago when I started taking my Yiddishkeit, my Judaism, a lot more seriously. Started learning Torah and investing a lot more of myself and my time into Judaism, and decided that I would start taking on mitzvahs one step at a time. First, the learning-based mitzvahs, and then kashrus, and then keeping Shabbos, being Shomer Shabbos. Around the same time I became Shomer Shabbos, I got a very significant and very substantial record deal with a record label in the UK called Island Records, which is part of Universal Music Group. Big, huge organisation who in the past have had acts like U2 and Bob Marley and Florence and the Machine and Mumford & Sons, and everything was going swimmingly. And when they signed me, I told them, there's something you have to know about me. I'm an Orthodox Jew, and as such, I can't work on Friday nights or Saturday days. Okay, they were very eager to sign me, so they said, okay, fine, that's great, no problem, we'll deal with it. So they dealt with it, and time went on, and I'd made an album, and the album was about to be released, and then just by pure coincidence, even though it's a funny word in Judaism, every piece of work I was being offered for promotion of my album was on Friday night and on Saturday day, Shabbos. So I told my record company, I'm really sorry, I can't do it. So they understood the first few times, and it all went by quite nicely. And then every other opportunity was coming in. Eventually I got offered to go on tour with a fairly successful female singer, and I said I couldn't do it because it fell over the Passover period. And then the summer came, and lots of different festivals were offered, all falling on Shabbos Kodesh, until it came to the high holidays, came to the month of Elul and then the month of Tishrei. And I told my record label, I'm really sorry, there's going to be a month here where I'm basically out of the game. I can't do gigs on Shabbos, won't be able to do gigs on the Yom Tovim, on the holidays, and I'm sorry. So they said, okay, fine, we'll just block out this period of the calendar. So Rosh Hashanah went by, no problem. Yom Kippur, great. Until Motzi Yom Kippur, when I got a phone call from my record label who told me that I had an amazing opportunity to do a live performance for the BBC the following Thursday. I thought that's very nice. Following Thursday just so happens to be one of the Jewish holidays, which has the same status as Shabbos. You can't work, obviously, on those days. So I told my record label, I'm really sorry, I can't do it. At which point they told me, if you don't do it, we're going to have to sack you. We're going to have to drop you from the label. And yep, sure enough, that opportunity came and went over Sukkot. And yeah, they dropped me. I got sacked. I'm laughing now. At the time I wasn't laughing. At the time I was gutted, and I went to my rabbi. He's a very special man called Rabbi David Tugendhaft, who lives in London, and I told him what happened. And then I was pretty distraught. And a few months had gone by this point, and the final process of getting rid of me from the label had taken place. And I said to him, what do I do? You know, I've made certain sacrifices for Judaism, and it hasn't seemed to have worked out for me. At which point he said, look, the story of Abraham in the Torah, when he was given a massive test by God to take his son Isaac up to top of a mountain and shecht him. You know, and obviously he was willing to do that. He was willing to do exactly what God told him to do. And even though obviously it transpired that Yitzchak did not get shechted, thank God, that decision of Avraham Avinu, my Rav said, was the pinnacle moment in world history. That single moment when the Jewish people, the pledge that God made to Avraham Avinu, so the Jewish people would exist and would be, was as a result of that decision. And he said, no matter what you do, no matter what decision you make, if you make the right one, even though it seems really hard at the time and it may seem so cloudy and unclear why you have to make that decision, in the long term you will get siyata d'shemaya. You'll get tremendous help from heaven.
And it feels like I am just too close to love you. There's nothing I can really say. I can't lie no more. I can't lie no more. Got to be true to myself. And it feels like I am just too close to love you. So I'll be on my way.
So after losing my job and being unable to pay my rent check or any other checks, or take care of any other financial responsibilities, I was literally down to my last pennies, and being a bit confused by the whole thing, I got an email from Microsoft, not as a performer of Too Close, but as a songwriter. They tried to contact other people, but it just hadn't happened, and eventually through my music publishers they got in touch with me and said, we want to use your song for our international campaign, and they did, and as a result, that song Too Close sold just under 6 million copies, and the album has now sold around 1 million copies worldwide that Too Close was on. So literally, keeping Shabbos has given me the hugest amounts of brachos. I really feel as a result of that decision to keep Shabbos, I've had tremendous siyata d'shemaya, huge amounts of blessings from that decision, and hope you guys do too.
So I'll be on my way.
Today's portion of Pirkei Avot, or Ethics of Our Fathers, comes from chapter 2, verse 11. Rabbi Yeshua is quoted as saying, "An evil eye, the evil inclination, and the hatred of one's fellows drive a person from the world." Sadly, we've reached the end of this week's episode of Simcha. As always, it's been a pleasure to have you join us. If you'd like to catch up on any previous week's episodes, please visit our website, www.spiritsister.co.za. From myself, Eitan Berger, and the whole Simcha team, we wish you a Chag Sameach and have a great week.